Good morning. It's great to see everybody here. Let me see. Next thing is board announcements. I have a fistful, so I have to sort through that a little bit. The outreach collection for Ukraine will continue through Sunday, April the 10th. Please refer to the website for details on how to contribute. If you leave a check today, mark on that check that it's for the special Ukraine collection. And if you're here in person and you have a checkbook, that's an easy way to do it. You can also mail that check in. It says special Ukraine outreach collection. And that collection is going to be working through UU churches in Romania and Hungary, I believe. Okay. I already announced the meeting in the Archer Shade Room. During the annual meeting, which will be June 5th this year, so mark your calendars, members will vote on the slate of nominees for Endowment Committee, Committee on Congregational Ministry, nominations for officers on the board, and Leadership Development Committee. These are all very important positions, and you are encouraged to think of yourself as qualified and worthy and step up. If you're curious about any of these committees and interested in learning more and possibly participating, please talk to Michelle Jostin or Don Barker after this service, and they're both in-house. Yay. Okay, many thanks to everyone who donated items to our silent auction. We'll be featuring each item in the newsletter or in Sunday morning announcements. You can see all the items on our website, so just click on the 2022 auction button at the top of the page. We have 4 items that will have one highest bidder winner. The first offering is movie tickets, candy and popcorn, donated by Liz and Laura. The Drosden family has donated 1 night of babysitting and 1 event of pet sitting. Nice. Finally, Maggie has donated a generous gift card to Wild Birds Unlimited. So look for more items in your newsletter on the website. This is usually a lot of fun and good stuff. Okay, now, and do we need the announcement about painting doors? Sure. Okay. There's 2 more doors to be painted, and we'd love to have a volunteer painter. So lots of painting has already been done. It looks fabulous. Just 2 doors to go. You can contact Ann Davis if you can help out with that. All right, put that one. April 23rd is game day. From 3 to 5 at UUFE, we will be hosting in-person intergenerational games. We will play Guess Who, compete in trivia, and play outside yard games. Hopefully the weather will be great. The game day party pack will be available for you to purchase, and it will enhance your fun and also provide food and drink. Later that evening, online from 7 to 9, you can also join your UU friends for virtual games. We will play Memory, Blank, and you'll miss it and enjoy some silly costumes. A party pack for this event will provide you with game pieces, snacks, costumes, and enhance your online fun. I've never been to an online party, so intriguing. We hope that everyone can join in at least one event, but you can come to both. Double your fun. Going on simultaneously will be our online silent auction. Starting Thursday, April 21st, and running through Sunday, April 24th, we are hosting a Fun Together silent auction. And your auction catalog is on the website, and bidding will occur using Google Pages. Hope that's easy. I'm sure it will be. We've got great tech. You can bid online with assistance during the in-person games and after the Sunday service. So I think I got them all. I hope so. There's lots happening, so that's great. Okay. Welcome to our fellowship. It's a little belated, it seems, but welcome. I'm Jean Rhian. I'll be leading the service today. I'm joined by Charlotte Jones-Carroll, and also by the many in the fellowship who make Sunday mornings possible. Gratitude to all who made today's service possible. We are an intentionally welcoming congregation and invite you to be part of our community. When we make this statement, we are stating our vision of love and acceptance. We welcome you, your background, your beliefs, all racial and ethnic identities, sexual orientation and gender identities, your theological perspectives. You are welcome here and accepted. If you have questions about the UU faith or this congregation specifically, you can ask a member, check with one of our greeters, or you can ask me. After the service, all are invited to head outside for social time. I don't know, is the deal now if you stay inside we have to get masked, or we just mind our social distances?
We can social inside.
Okay, we can social inside. Exciting. Okay.
There's actually be coffee.
And there will be coffee today. Yes, I'm sorry. In my rookie status, I forgot the prelude again this week. Prelude, please.
so much. That was Ukrainian.
Moldovan.
Moldovan. I'm Charlotte Jones-Carroll. We light our chalice today with the words of Van Jones. It is in that convergence of spiritual people becoming active and active people becoming spiritual that the hope for humanity now rests.
Join in opening hymn number 108. Let us join together in saying the covenant of our fellowship. At the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Easton, we seek to nurture spiritual and intellectual growth for all ages, and to be actively involved in community outreach and service, cherishing diversity and celebrating our oneness with all humanity. We covenant to support each other in the spirit of compassion, respect, and love. It is our quiet time. We do not speak because the voices are within us. It is our quiet time. We do not walk because the earth is in all of us. It is our quiet time. We do not dance because the music has lifted us to a place where the Spirit is. It is our quiet time. We rest with all of nature. Each week in our service, we take time to share what is on our heart. As we continue with hybrid services, we ask folks to submit joys and sorrows through the chat prior to the email. I would light the first candle today for all the troubles that are in the world. Troubles with disease, troubles with war, troubles in our environment, troubles amongst us and amongst our leaders.
And I am very, very happy to have Nevin Dawson here with us today, playing for us, and at Jean's request, even though this is, so I'm extending my joy to informational about what you're about to hear. This is the Prayer for Ukraine. I played it a couple of weeks ago just on the piano, which is, it's meant to be a choral work or a string quartet, so we're halfway there now with Nevin sustaining some notes here. It was written by Mykola Lysenko, first published in 1885, and some of you may recognize it because right after the war started, a Ukrainian choir sang it as the cold open on Saturday Night Live. Also, this is Wikipedia, but we'll assume that a lot of this information is correct because it's interesting. It first was the regular closing hymn and services of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Apparently gained national significance when it was performed by choirs during the Ukrainian War for Independence, 1917 to 1920. Again in 2001, performed in Kyiv during the parade celebrating the 10th anniversary of Ukraine's independence, and of course has been popularized since the invasion several weeks ago.
I wasn't going to say this as a joy, but the Social Justice Committee have teamed up with PFLAG and Transalliance and Glisten to host a series of conversations about gender. And we had about, I didn't count before I got up to say this, but maybe 16 participants who joined us for those conversations, both online and on Zoom. And it was just a really enriching and heartening experience that we had so many people come to talk about gender and to learn to be better allies. So it was just in time for Thursday's Transgender Day of Visibility, and I'm just joyful to be a part of that process in this community.
Oh, light the final candle for those joys and sorrows that remain can put in our hearts.
Offertory.
and we thank you for your gifts.
Good morning again. Good morning, all of you out there in Zoom land. I'd like to start with reading from this very interesting book, The Good Immigrant. It's a collection of essays by immigrants in America. This one is from Teju Cole, who's a Nigerian American, who speaks to what it's like to be a Nigerian or a Jamaican or other black person in America that's not originally an American. I began to become African a little more than 25 years ago. That was when I left Nigeria and moved to the US. I'd been born in the US and in the summer of 1975 and had been taken back to Nigeria in the fall of the same year. For the next 17 years, Nigeria was home. But I also knew I was American, that the US was kind of a home, because I'd been born there. But was I African? I didn't feel it. What I felt like was I was a Lagos boy, a speaker of Yoruba, a citizen of Nigeria. The Africans were those other people, some of whom I read about in books, or had seen wearing tribal costumes in magazines, or encountered in weird fictional form in movies. But in the summer of 1992, that began to change. The US provided contrast to my latent Africanness. What are you? I'm Nigerian. Where are you from? Lagos? No one had ever heard of Lagos, so I was an African. That was the kind of other that I was. It was news to me. I didn't fight back for long, though. I fell in with all the others who were in a similar predicament and began to learn African. On my way to becoming African, I also began to become black, which proved a more complex journey. African was about sharing a mutual space with African friends from across the continent, or people with whom I'd been placed in the same category. It had something to do with us finding ourselves strangers in a strange American land, but also with the shared experience of the background radiation of colonialism. The formalized white supremacy of colonial rule ended in Nigeria only 15 years before I was born. It was still fresh. African, whatever else it was about collectively undoing this assault. But black was something else. It was, in a sense, more inclusive. It took in all that colonial hangover and added to it the American experience of slavery. All that slave rebellion, Jim Crow, and contemporary racism, as well as the connective tissue that bound the black Atlantic into a single territory of pain, which brought all of the Caribbean into its orbit, as well as European, Latin American, and global diasporic blackness. So, to be black in America, that localized tenor of black, that had to be learned. It had to be learned and loved. Black skin was the admission to the classroom, and skin sometimes didn't have to be black. It could be just a few shades darker than white. The Black American cultural codes were the lesson. So I learned black, like Obama learned black. Like black British living in LA learned black. Like Jamaicans in Brooklyn, Haitians in Miami, Eritreans in DC, and Caribbeans in the Bronx learned black. We learned black and loved black, knowing all the while that this wasn't the only black. So, I'm going to adjust this a little bit because it comes off my head. There we go. Sorry I'm so tall. So as Jean said, I'm Charlotte Jones-Carroll. My home church is the River Road Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Bethesda. And I'm also speaking really out of personal experience, working for the last 5 years with Youth for Social Justice, an advocacy network. Started out regionally and is trying now to become more national. because we do advocacy at the federal level. In addition to immigration and refugee issues, we touch on poverty and on environment, and the last few years on democracy, defending democracy. So now I'm going to quickly review some of the factors. I want to thank, by the way, this congregation and Jean in particular for taking the time to think about and listen about human migration. I think it's extremely important. And my background is economics, so if I throw out a few numbers, I hope you'll be patient with me. But what are the factors that drive people to migrate? So economists say they're both push and pull factors, but they're social, economic, security, and environmental. We can classify them that way. And there's also internal and external. The movement of the Black Americans in the last century from the South to northern cities to escape racism and find jobs, find better jobs. That was an internal migration. You might also say that the way that we drove Native Americans down the Trail of Tears to the west against their willingness was another kind of internal displacement, internal migration. Mostly we think of immigrants and emigrants, though, people crossing national borders. Of course, millennia ago, people crossed borders. We didn't have nation states then, but so now if you start thinking about the reasons why, on the economic side, of course, push factors are that people are trying to escape poverty. Or maybe there's one family member who is going to migrate to get a better job. This is what we see a lot today, in order to send money back home, which economists call remittances. We'll hear more about that later. But actually, there is a lot of middle-class migration. People coming from middle-income countries, people who have enough money to buy an airplane ticket or go to college elsewhere, and they're migrating to find better jobs in their career area. So that's kind of a pull factor. The U.S. might have better paying jobs or more interesting jobs, and also to get better educated. On the social side, people migrate to reunite with family members who've gone ahead. Or just if they don't have family members already in the receiving country, they might just be trying to move to find a better life for their children. I mean, historically, when there was a population overgrowth, it reduced the land and job possibilities, so people moved, like the Vikings went to England, partly to look for treasure, but really because there were too many Danes in Denmark, and they didn't have enough land. And they found similar land in a slightly nicer climate in England. You can tell I've been watching some Netflix films there. What we see a lot about is the security one, right? Both Afghanistan and Ukraine will make that very clear to you, that people migrate to escape civil conflict and war. And individuals migrate to escape persecution from being in a particular ethnic or racial or other persecuted group. I think of the gay Honduran guy I interpreted for at the citizenship interview. His description of the persecution he suffered in Honduras just for being gay was very troubling. And in general, people might migrate to find just a safer environment for one's own identity, as often gay people in very small towns will do, but going to larger cities or New York, wherever they feel more at comfort with being able to show their identity. And finally, environmental. I mean, there are lots of examples that I'm going to skip through, but I have certainly found a number of, for instance, the Guatemalans. I understand there are a lot of Guatemalans in this part of Maryland, but we have, I have driven former small farmers from Guatemala to get their ankle monitors checked. They've migrated here, they said, because for 3 or 4 years, drought in Guatemala meant that they couldn't continue to grow their crops, and so they came here looking for other ways to earn money. And of course, the Haitians came because first they had the earthquake, and then they had the hurricane. So they've been trying to come. Some first went, as you might have been reading, to Chile and other places, but finally they're trying to come here and got deported back, unfortunately. And then there are those low-lying islands in the Pacific and elsewhere with the ocean levels rising. They are losing their islands, not just their beaches, but their whole islands, and they are forced to migrate, or will be. So those are some of the examples. They interact, of course. Today, so people are still escaping violence, persecution, poverty, disaster. And they're also seeking better education, though. As a result, right now, last year, 244 million people live outside of the country of their birth. In the U.S. I'll mainly concentrate on the U.S. That's actually triple the number that lived outside just in 1960. So that's quite a growth of people. The interesting thing is that you might think everybody always goes from a poor country to a rich country, but that's not really the case. The people, only 69% of those 244 million live in the richer countries. Others migrate and do find jobs in nearby countries. I used to live in Nicaragua. I know a lot of Nicaraguans, for Civil War reasons, migrated to Costa Rica. And one of the biggest, actually the biggest in 2015, sending country was India. Many Indians emigrate to other places. Now a lot of them go to the Middle East where they find jobs, but many come here. And many of them, again, are middle class, upper class. They come because they have economic aspirations that go beyond what they can find in their own countries. And they have the resources to pay for those airline tickets. So just to shake up, in case you thought it was always poor countries to rich countries, it isn't. But the top sending countries, that is, people are emigrating from, often vary because of conflicts. Like in 2015, Syria was within the top 10. You can bet that today Ukraine and Afghanistan are in the top 10 of sending countries. Yeah, and you probably read about how many migrants have been trying to cross the Mediterranean and sinking in their boats, both from the Middle East and from Africa. So it's interesting, recipient countries or receiving countries like the U.S., we actually want migrants to come here if they meet our interests. And I'm going to run quickly through how that's worked in the last 250 years. Don't worry, I'll give it to you in 5 minutes. The U.S. has an aging population, and our population growth that adds to our economy is really from immigration, because we kind of don't even quite net just the Native American, not the Native Americans, but the American population, not counting immigrants, is not growing at all. The net people dying and babies being born is negative. So it's really our immigrants that keep us growing and vibrant economically. So we want to keep those, and we have set up our legislation, our laws, legislation in ways that do that. But actually, some of the sending countries would like to find ways to keep their people as well. They can't necessarily keep them there, but they value the investments and the remittances that those people send back. So they might offer dual citizenship, or they might make ways for the diaspora of their people to kind of remain in touch with the home country. Let me just mention a word about remittances. That's what migrants who come basically send money back home. Those remittances worldwide reached over $600 billion last year. So it's not a small thing. It's actually far greater for many countries, especially Central America, than the bilateral or multilateral foreign aid that goes to those countries. It can be 1/5 of the total gross domestic product of countries in smaller countries, which is the case I know with El Salvador. There are examples of issues, though, and I think we're seeing a lot of that, integrating people from different cultures, from very different cultures, into a society, even one like ours, which is based on immigrants, can cause social tensions. Overall, countries with aging populations need those immigrants, but they sometimes, I mean, the immigrants come in, they take jobs that others won't take. I have a son-in-law who works in construction. He's an engineer, he has a nice job. He couldn't have that job if they didn't have a lot of workers who are almost all immigrants to do the tough construction work. But sometimes people who are in those same fields feel somewhat resentful. And we certainly have politicians who are using immigration as a wedge issue to kind of worsen the other party's political success. So, for example, you might hear people saying immigrants are criminals, or more likely to be criminals. But statistics actually show that heavily immigrant neighborhoods have lower crime rates than regular neighborhoods. So let me just get you a quick history of U.S. Immigration policies. You'll see that, like every country's immigration policies, they serve our interests, our economic interests in particular, but they're also a sad history of racism. Now, back before, when we were still a colony, of course, we wanted people to come, encouraged people to come. People came even as indentured servants by getting employers here to let them work and pay off the cost of the trip over on the ship. But there was really not a welcoming of people that didn't speak English. A lot of Germans came in the colonial periods, but there was even resentment towards the Germans. So then at the time, and of course, Africans were brought here voluntarily as slaves. That was a kind of a push factor for them because they were captured and brought over whether they liked it or not. But when we became a nation, we had to define, well, what is a citizen? Citizenship, and the first immigration law was introduced in 1790, the Naturalization Act. That said, only a free white person of good character could be a citizen. At least they allowed women to be citizens, even if we couldn't vote at the time. But, and blacks actually couldn't become citizens until 1868, almost 80 years later, after the 14th Amendment was ratified by all the states. The states at the time decided their own, or there was either no immigration policy or they decided their own until finally, right after the Civil War, the Supreme Court and the particular law made the federal level the only level that could decide on immigration policy, because it was immigration for the whole of the U.S. Once you were inside, you could kind of move around from state to state. So let me skip ahead. The first comprehensive immigration law was passed in 1891, and it was designed to exclude sick people, criminals, and to set up a system for deporting people who were here illegally. They didn't actually have laws for that before 1891. And they finally, after all those years, started to staff ports of entry, land and sea ports of entry, to screen immigrants or potential immigrants. Let me skip ahead to 1924 because that's a pretty notorious time. Does everybody know what eugenics is? You've heard of eugenics? That's the pseudoscience that was very popular at the time, especially among the upper classes, about how the northern and western Europeans were the superior race, and even southern Europeans were like a level down, and people from Africa and Asia, well, that was much worse. So there was a Chinese Exclusion Act, by the way, in the late 1800s, because the whites who were working in California after the gold rush, there was a depression, they found the Chinese were willing to work for lower wages than they were. So they hustled over to Congress and had a law passed that excluded Chinese from entering the U.S. But in 1924, there was a comprehensive act called the Johnson-Reed Act that basically set a national origin quota. So for many years after that, people could only come in as a quota of the number of, like 7%, I think it was, of the nationalities that were already here. But they, as the basis for that, remember there was a big surge in the 1920s of people coming in from Southern Europe. So they went back to the 1890 census to use as a basis, even though this is a 1924 law, because the 1890 census was the one that pre-surge that had a lot more Northern and Western Europeans that they thought were the superior race. So that continued for a while. It kind of cemented. There was another law that actually excluded all other Asians in addition to the Chinese in 1917, I think. But this continued until World War II. Guess what? World War II, we had labor shortages. So guess what? Not only did we have a law that allowed Mexicans to come in and do the hard agricultural work. Of course, women replaced men in many areas, but in the agriculture, they arranged a Bracero agreement, and they ended the exclusion of the Chinese and other Asians. Right after the war, there was, under Truman, clarity about refugees and a law that allowed us to accept, provided that we would accept, I find this a very small number, 200,000 refugees from Europe who were displaced by World War II. And we actually allowed the 15,000 who were already here to adjust their status. I find that a very, very modest number. President Kennedy actually later did something similar for the Cubans who were fleeing Castro. So you can see how this served our political interests at the time, Cold War, anti-communism. The immigration law we have today is actually based on 1965. I'll mention quickly all the other tightenings of that. But 1965, under President Johnson, we had a new law that got away from the national origin, created immigration based on family reunification and skilled labor needs. And both of those make a lot of sense, and we can see this today, even though there's still kind of limits. So people who are, say, from the Philippines might have to wait 18 years or something to come off family reunification visa. But those are that is now 60 years later, still what we're using. But we had a lot of tightening after that, under Reagan, George Bush, Clinton, and George W. Bush. We increased controls on immigration. We had more border barriers. We started employer sanctions if they were hiring undocumented laborers. It used to be that judges could use their discretion to decide on relief from deportation. Well, that was ended. All these, we tightened controls all over, but then we had to turn around and loosen them up when we wanted to be our own interests again. In the kind of Cold War sense, we had laws that turned around and allowed exceptions for Cubans, Nicaraguans, Salvadorans, Guatemalans, former Soviet bloc nationals. So again, anybody we wanted to keep, we had to make an exception to our general immigration laws. Actually, under Reagan, there was the first amnesty, people call it, in 1985. He allowed the 2.7 million undocumented persons living in the U.S. to regularize their status, which is what we're asking today for the 11 million people, undocumented people that are here. But he actually did manage to get it in as part of a package that had a lot of border controls and other emergency tightening things. We also had the temporary protected status, TPS. You might have heard of that. Many Central Americans are able to stay here. It just keeps getting renewed. Haitians and others also have been able to stay here, and they're now, and they've talked about it for Ukrainians. Afghans mainly, if they had worked with the U.S. or their family member who worked for the U.S. or allies, they were able to come on something called a special immigrant visa. But anyway, all of that was going on, and we had 9/11. So that tightened things up again. 9/11 produced two new laws, the U.S. Patriot Act, and that created terrorism as grounds for excluding immigrants, and the Department of Homeland Security was created that combined all of the immigration agencies together with our emergency FEMA and cybersecurity agencies. So over and over again in the 21st century, legislators have agreed that our old immigration system is broken. Repeatedly, new comprehensive immigration bills have been tried. They almost achieved one in 2013, it got very close, but Congress had one almost ready to pass. A group called the GANMA, the bipartisan GANMA, was working to pass it, but there was a surge from the Tea Party, and it scared legislators. Some important key leaders in Congress were voted out, and they got full feet on anything that could be used as a wedge issue. Senator Durbin has repeatedly introduced the DREAM Act. Dreamers are people brought up here as children with no decision of their own, and the DREAM Act would have allowed them a pathway to citizenship because they had grown up here and they felt American. This has not been passed over and over and over. Finally, Obama had to create DACA by executive action to give them something. That DACA needs to be renewed with a fee paid every 2 years, but still it allows them to study and to work. So we have this situation. We had this situation until about 5 years ago where we badly needed immigration reform and we weren't getting it. But then Trump came in. So you can tell I'm almost at the end. They had actually no new legislation passed either, but they used over 400 executive actions to drastically alter the whole U.S. immigration system. I mean, they had the Muslim ban, a lot of rule changes, personnel changes. They put in people hostile to immigration. They reduced the cap for refugees. We have a regular cap. It used to be around 125,000 under Obama and earlier, but it's decided between Homeland Security and State Department that this was reduced to practically nothing by Trump. And even if there was a cap there, he effectively removed the processing possibilities by moving staff around, people who would normally be available to process applications for visas. Of course, there was the Remain in Mexico, they call it Migrant Protection Protocol, but the Remain in Mexico, most of us immigrant advocates call it Trump had it put in place so that people couldn't come across the border. They had to wait in Mexico if they were seeking asylum. They got a number that might be months away. The most notorious, of course, was the child separation policy. Our laws provide you can't keep a child, a minor, in detention. I would love to talk for an hour about detention. Why are people being detained? But that's a whole other talk. But anyway, they started, because that was forcing them to release whole families. The Trump administration started separating the children, giving them to foster homes and keeping the parent. That allowed them to keep the parents longer in detention. Well, of course, that didn't work very well, and there was such an outcry that they had to stop it. But there were still many thousands of children who had been separated. So when I close, I want to talk about one thing that Trump started, the Trump administration started. Once we had the pandemic, they started using the pandemic as an excuse not to even let people through, so immediate expulsion. It was called Title 42. You probably read a lot about it. So it meant that it was ridiculous, really, because people were coming across the border anyway, if they were American citizens or if they had legal visas. So it wasn't really stopping people from coming through. So Biden administration quickly undid the Muslim ban, halting border walls, and the comprehensive immigration bill over and tried to get it passed, which it didn't, got stagnated there. But he did, Biden actually did keep until this weekend, or until actually May. They made a decision just this past few days to stop trying to force people out using Title 42 as a pretext. So here we are today, I'm almost finished, with a little possibility of passing any comprehensive immigration reform. Even serious struggles to pass bipartisan bills like the DREAM Act. So we've been, for the past 5 years, UUs for Social Justice has been approaching Congress with letters, or we used to ask constituents to write letters. We would approach people in the appropriate committees, talk to their staff. By the way, our Maryland Senators, Cardin and Van Hollen, are very supportive of immigration, and in fact have been sponsoring a bill to allow people holding temporary protected status who've been here for a while to become citizens. So, but we've been trying to do advocacy on CPS, advocacy on Title 42, on reintroducing the normal asylum processes, which, by the way, there's a law that we are part of, an international law, that we regularly are breaking by refusing to consider people seeking asylum, or at least giving them an interview. So, what UUs value to guide my work? The first principle, of course, inherent worth and dignity of every person. The second one, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And the sixth, a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. When we engage potential constituents and also when we approach Congress, we not only cite those, but we also tell them about in 2013, the UUA General Assembly passed a statement of, I forget what they're called, but anyway, on immigration, the statement of conscience says immigration is a moral issue. And we've had several other followers trying to get ending to end detention. So it's embedded in UU principles, it's embedded in UU statements of principle, statements of conscience. Okay, let me wrap up here, just sort of saying, how would you like to apply the principles? How would you like to advocate? You're welcome to sign up with UUSJ if you want to write letters to Congress or join virtual meetings. Maybe you're doing some things already related, but there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do at the state level too, and we have the Legislative Ministry of Maryland to do that. They're trying right now to get access to legal counsel. It's like triple or quadruple your chances of getting asylum if you have legal representation compared to just trying to represent yourself. I hope. Well, we're sponsoring River Road in Bethesda, which is my congregation, has been supporting an Afghan family for about 5 years now. They were almost ready to thrive on their own, but the pandemic caused the father to lose his job, and so we're back supporting him. Last thing is, you can speak up if you see or hear immigrants being harassed, if you see people criticizing them. You can help immigrants in a risky situation find a way out by sitting with them and asking them if they would like you to accompany them away from that situation. Not confronting the harasser. So all of these things can help change the narrative, I feel, the narrative in the U.S. in favor of the many benefits to our economy and our culture and society that immigrants bring. Let me stop there. I think I'm past my time, but I look forward to continuing discussion afterwards if any of you have any questions or if you're interested in signing up. I believe we are closing with hymn 112.
And now may we go forth in the certainty of faith, in the knowledge of love, and in the vision of hope. And in our going, may we be blessed with all good things. May we take with us the fire that burns deep within us. Let it reflect the human spirit touched by the mystery of love, in reason, compassion, community, faith, justice, and love.